Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today we have a great returning guest. We have Denise Filipchuck. How are you doing?
Very good this morning, Tracy. Thank you.
Good. I'm happy to have you back on the show. A few weeks back, we aired a joint episode with Kevin, Jerry, yourself called Managing the Storm. And that is based off of an in-person event that you guys do by the same name. Now, this week, I'm having you back to talk about your portion of the seminar that you put on. And we're going to dive right in. Before we do that, can you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
So thank you. Thank you for having me back again. It's an honor and a privilege, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. So again, like you said, my name is Denise Filipchuck, and I am the owner of Filipchuck Management, Inc. So we are a consulting practice that works specifically with farm families in the areas of financial management, intensive debt management, strategic planning, and transition planning. We also have a bookkeeping service line for our clients as well. So those are the areas that we focus on, working with farm families, and primarily in the areas of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, although we do some work in Alberta as well.
Okay, excellent. So in your seminar, there's the three individuals, yourself, Kevin, and Jerry, and you each bring a different expertise to the seminar. And I know you work to the farm business management end of it. Kevin does the HR, Jerry covers a lot of the personal conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So today we're going to be speaking about your specialty, and we'll get into all the different things that you work with farmers on. And I know in your consulting work, this is the stuff you help farmers with. So I'm excited to dive in a little bit and talk about these items. Why don't we start with working capital and cash flow? Let's just dive right into the big one.
Yeah, it's a big one, and it's a big area of concern for farm or mixed. Working capital and cash flow is often a big area of concern and needs to be mindful of to manage the financial health of the business. So I do like to spend a lot of time talking about that working capital and cash flow. A couple things to think about when you want to work on or analyze your working capital. Things to get you started on that is update that with that net worth statement, looking at your credit portfolio review at the same time, and thinking about your working capital and cash flow prior to any large cash withdrawals, down payments, new loan payments, those type of things. Just having a good look at that so that you know that you've got balance in your overall financial health. So not just looking at that working capital and cash flow, although that's an important piece, but looking at that overall financial picture when you're making those decisions. So a quick way to do that, and we're going to talk about that today. We're not going to get deep into the financial ratios and indicators, but just some quick financial pulse checks. So you can easily do this at home with your own numbers, some quick calculations. And one of those is that sources and uses of cash. Just where do you get what are all the sources of cash that you have to work with, whether it's your own cash, inventory, or short-term credit options, and the uses of that cash. And then also we're going to talk about that timing of cash flow over that next 12 to 18 months, ensuring that your sources of cash line up with your uses of cash. So those are the things that we're going to talk about today. And when it comes to cash flow and producers being concerned about that, FCC did a poll, I think it was about a year and a half ago, that working capital was among the top concerns for producers right now. And I think that's not just a right now thing, but an ongoing through generations. And that's one of the most common issues when I first start working with farm families, whether it's from a financial management perspective or a transition planning, is we're not, the working capital and having access to the appropriate credit sometimes gets a little offside and does create some cash flow constraints. So that's why I like to focus a lot of discussion around those two areas. So we can have a look at, it's a big one, yes. And so talking about your sources of cash, if you want to do a quick calculation of it, look at your own working capital. So that would be your current assets less your current liabilities. So that's one number you want to jot down when you're working out this calculation. Then also looking at your operating loans, those authorized limits, what you have available to you on your operating credit facilities. Jot that number down as well. Then look into your crop input lines. So if you're a grain producer, what do you have available as far as your limits for crop input financing? However, if your limits are far in excess of what you're actually going to use, because many times that is the case, your limits could be significantly higher than what you're actually going to purchase there for product. So whatever is less, whatever you're actually going to use or what your limit is, write down that combined total. And you're going to have crop input lines at many different places. So write down all of the places that you have credit, and then that combined total is the number that we're interested in this calculation. So whether it's 600,000 or $1 million or whatever it is, what that limit is or what you're going to use for crop input financing. And then your cash advances available. So whether this is through canola growers advance for crops or livestock advances, what do you have available for you for cash advances? Write that number down as well. And then, of course, your off-farm income. Many farm families do rely on off-farm income. So whether that's 30,000 a year or 80, whatever it happens to be, what is that off-farm income? That gross income amount is the number that we're interested in here. Jot that down as well. So then adding those up, so that you should have 5 numbers there to total up. Add that up, and that is your sources of cash. So that's an important number. It's not going to tell you the timing of it from this calculation, but it will give us an idea just first off, when we're doing this pulse check quickly, what is the sources of cash? So add those up. And then, of course, we want to be looking at the uses of cash. So here's another calculation that we can work through. Again, no financial indicators, no ratios that you have to memorize, just simply these numbers, add them up. So you'll want to look at what your variable expenses are. So not your fixed costs yet, but your variable expenses. So what are your operating costs? Write that number down. You can find that on your financial statements, or if you're not incorporated, you can get that off of your income tax. So if you're farming as a sole proprietor. So write that number down. Your land rent expense. So all of the areas that you're, all the landlords that you're renting from, total those up. And what is your annual land rent expense? Jot that number down. And then have a look at your living expenses. And this is often a tough one. And many producers aren't really sure what their living expenses are because the farm pays for everything. And I've heard that many, many times. So have a good thinking around what are your actual living expenses. It's unlikely that they're 25,000, which I often hear. Well, it's only 25,000. Maybe and maybe it is. And maybe it is. Fair enough. But more likely for a family, you're going to be in that 60, 80. It could be even $100,000 a year. Whatever it is, jot that number down because that is a source of cash. And as my dad used to say, you can't spend it everywhere. So if you're spending on living expenses, you can't spend it on variable expenses or land rent or any other business expense. So we want to know what is the realistic living expenses. So jot that number down. And then any other drawings. If you're in the middle of a farm transition and you're doing I've got one of my clients is $100,000 a year. So we want to be mindful of those. We're thinking about the use of transition loan, but transition payouts that have to be made every year. Are you buying out your uncle or your parents? And does this much money need to go to them per year? Make sure you include that. This is the use of cash as well. And then your debt service requirement. Depending on where you're getting your information from to do this calculation, if you're using the current portion of long-term debt, if that is already included in your current liabilities because you're pulling this number out of your financial statement, don't double count them by including them here. But ensure that we've got your total debt service requirement included in this number because that is a source of cash as well. But like I said, be mindful because it may already be in that working capital number, depending on where you're getting your information from. And once you've got those numbers, you should have another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers to calculate up, total those up. And from your first calculation, your sources of cash, less this calculation, your uses of cash, that will give your operations cash flow position. So that net total that you've got there will give you an idea of, based on what I've got going on, do I have enough working capital for the year or not? In the case of an expansion, if you're doing a large expansion, this is a very important calculation to do because what might have been sufficient last year may not be sufficient next year if you're doing a large expansion. If you're adding 1 quarter or 2, that may not be a big deal, but if you're going somewhere of increasing your farm by 30, 50%, your working capital may get a little offside. You may need to be adjusting what your sources of cash are because your uses of cash are going to be significantly higher until you sell that crop. You're going to have those expenses in advance of that new crop coming in. So that's a really good way to get a quick financial pulse check just by doing that relatively simple calculation. It's not going to tell you the timing of cash flow. So we're going to talk about that next, but it's going to give you that overall annual picture. Do I have enough? And if you don't, then you can drill down from there and find out, okay, where is the problem? Is it my own working capital or do I just not have enough credit available?
Makes sense.
Yeah. So then, like I said, it doesn't tell you the timing of cash flow. And timing of cash flow is very important because you might have enough for the year, but if it's not lining up from a month to month, that could cause a lot of stress. So, and issues with your creditors. So we want to talk about that monthly cash flow analysis. So what that is, it's a worksheet that outlines all of the cash inflows and the outflows on a per month basis. So this is a bit of work to put this together, but it's month by month. So an easier way to do is start with your net worth statement. What is your cash position? Start with that month. And then month by month, what are all your grain or cattle sales going to be projected? Some of them are going to be quite known. If you're doing a 12 to 18 month cash flow, you're going to maybe be into the next crop year. So you may be doing some guessing in your projections, but at least you've got a plan in place. So you get all the places where revenue is coming in, get those into your calculation. And then of course you want to have all of the places that it's going out. So you're going to have all of your crop input financing, all of your costs in, your living expenses in there as well, and all of your payment dates, payments per date of all of your loan payments. So you want to have all of that in there. And then you're going to have a month by month. It's the best shot at a crystal ball that we can have when we're farming is having a good look at this cash flow month by month, outlining, is there going to be cash flow surplus or shortfalls? So it gives us this window into the future as to what those are going to be and allows you to make any changes that you need to make in advance of those happening instead of creeping up onto that month saying, okay, we've got a whole bunch of payments coming this month. We got to move some grain. This gives that window ahead of time going, okay, you know what? Come March, we're going to be a little bit short here. We're going to be in excess of our operating loan. We got to get some things moving here well in advance. So if you're doing this as of the end of November, that gives you a nice window of opportunity to work in. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And it also helps with your profitability. So a common use for it is to identify any shortfalls, but you might be in a situation where you can identify large surpluses well in advance of them happening as well and say, okay, we're going to have some major surpluses here where we're not using this cash. Let's find the highest and best use for it. So that might be a short-term investment. When you're looking at your working capital, maybe you just have a lot more than you need. And some producers definitely are in that position this year. There are some that are in a shortfall position because they were struggling with some poor crops this year. But if you're in that more ideal situation where you've got some decent crops and now you've got some good prices to go with it, you may have significantly more working capital than what the business needs to use. So you may then be looking at some strategic term debt reduction might be a good option for you to improve profitability and not be paying interest costs if they're not needed. So some really good ideas there as to why you'd want to spend that time. And it does take a little bit of time to work on a monthly cash flow. And like I said, it's our best shot at a window or a crystal ball into the next 12 to 18 months or 24 months. But typically it's a 12 to 18 month cash flow that gets done and gives you that look into the future to deal with those whatever it happens to be in advance of it happening.
Okay, makes sense.
And if you do need to get more credit available, gives you lots of time to work with your creditors, because if you've got a shortfall position and you need to be in front of your creditor and talking to them about getting either a temporary bulge or perhaps you've identified, we just don't have enough credit in general. We need to talk about a permanent increase, let's say in the operating structure. You want to give your banker lots of time to help you work with that. And, it's not something they necessarily can put together in a week or two. This might be a 6-week time frame that you need. So it gives you that opportunity to get in front of them early to get a better result.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Cash flow is such a tricky thing for farms. For traditional businesses, you often get revenue in every month and your expenses out, right? So it's a little more balanced. But I know for our farm, just like many farms out there, you get paid once a year. So cash flow is that's the big one for a lot of farms. It's not always easy.
It really is. And there's many farms out there that have a really strong equity position, but that equity doesn't pay the bills. It's that cash flow that does that. And oftentimes when I start working with farm families, it's really the cash flow situation that brings them to seek some assistance. It's just that strangled cash flow for many, many years, not necessarily being able to manage their business the way they want on the operation side. It might be in cases where they aren't investing in that crop like they would like to. They just don't have the funds available to put the amount of fertilizer and the crop inputs into that crop to get the crop that they feel they could grow, because they don't have the adequate working capital available to do that. So sometimes it's just a matter of having a look at things. How can we make this better? What's reasonable for the size and type of the operation? It's just about having that good look and see where things can be changed to allow them to farm the way they want to farm and the way they know that they should be able to.
Question for you. Now, this is what you do as a service. You work with farmers, and there's farmers out there that have this down pat, work with it daily. There's farmers in probably every group. And I know myself, I learned a little bit about this in university, but you really don't learn it until you get in and until it's your own product and your own business financials, right? So I'm curious if there's somebody in the audience, and I always go here, and I go here a lot because I know the human nature. We expect ourselves to know everything about every single part of a business when we're one person, and we can't know it all. So I always throw myself under the bus in being a business owner, knowing I've often waited too long to reach out because of, call it ego, call it, you don't want to be embarrassed and say you don't know. So I imagine reaching out to somebody like you for cash flow in the financial end, which is so tricky. It's not that intimidating, right? I mean, really, it's a quick call. And I imagine it's not that hard for you to work through with a farm family, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit of preliminary background work. Of course, we need to get the information to know, where things stand. But yeah, as far as just reaching out, just to have a chat and see, here's what I've got going on. I need some help, but I'm not even sure what I need help. So when someone is first reaching out, I call that a discovery call. And so that is really just a very risk-free time for us to chat, where that farmer tells me, about their business, the structure, some of the successes, the challenges they're working through. And then I tell them about my practice and what I do. And between us, through that discussion, we figure out, is there a fit to work together? And I said, this is risk-free. So that discovery call usually takes about an hour. There's no charge for that. So no reason not to reach out. And to your point, saying, as a business owner, we like to do, and we're almost, I think, hardwired to do everything ourselves. And we do. And I'm guilty of that as well as a small business owner. Yeah. So definitely, we are guilty of that. But don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Just finding, even in that discovery call, you're going to pick up many tips and ideas, and sometimes just talking things through make things much clearer. And farming in general is a lonely occupation. There's not a lot of people you can bounce ideas off of. It's not like working in a larger organization where you can go to the next office and say, hey, what do you think about this? Farmers often don't have the benefit of that. The guy down the road is your competitor. He might be your friend, but you're probably not talking business with him, because he is your competitor. You're competing for land in that very tight and competitive area, most likely. So to your point about reaching out, and I like to stress this, is reach out early. As my dad also used to say, a stitch in time saves 9. So the earlier you reach out for help, the smaller that problem is, and it may not be a real problem at all. It might be a lot easier to solve than what you think it is. And I do find that is when I start working with farm families, it's not nearly as bad as they think it is. There's just, I look at it and I see all the options and areas that things can be improved, and often it is a lot less daunting than what they think it is. But the earlier you seek help, the far more options you have available to you. If you wait too long, then your options get less and less as you go. And then when you're feeling like, I think we could do things better, that's the time to reach out. And if it's just a wonder about, like, hey, there's some interesting things that I've heard, I'd like to know more about this, reach out for that as well. You never know what you're going to discover. And what I call is that discovery call. And that's what it's about. Just sharing some information and collecting information to see where you go from there.
Excellent. Okay, that is great. Thank you for sharing that. I know we can be our own worst enemy at times and then just really shoot ourselves in the foot, and probably speaking from a lot of experience over here.
Yes. When I worked for FCC years ago, I had a great manager in the Brandon district, and he used to say, Denise, don't stand in your own way. And I would stop and think about that. And yeah, you know what? Really, we're typically the ones standing in our own way. Nothing really else is. It's often just us. So he's like, get out of your own way. I'm like, all right. And then I would get unstuck. So I've said that to a few producers along the way as well. It's like, what if we just didn't stand in our own way and we just allowed ourselves to do this? Where could we go from here? And yeah,
I like that one. I'm going to use that one going forward. Geez, you might almost, Jerry Friesen's on the show a lot, and he has good one-liners and quotes all the time. We have a thing. You're good. You're in a race neck and neck with him for some good quotes. He's going to watch this and he'll have to up his game now. So that's awesome. Don't stand in your own way. I like it. Okay. I wanted to really bring that out because more than ever, it's the mind game over the strategy and the actual business itself, right? Do you want to move into debt management? I think that might be a logical place to go from here.
Sure. And yes, absolutely. When you're looking at your working capital and your sources of cash, we talked a bit about debt being one of those sources of cash, accessing credit and ensuring that you've got enough credit available for the size of the business. Often I do find that the farms will grow, but the amount of credit available doesn't grow with it. So I will notice, farms that have gone maybe from 2,000 acres up to 5, 6, getting up into 8, and they're still using the same operating loan they did 10, 15 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
And then wondering, why, cash flow is tight, always tight. And as far as their net worth, or not their net worth, but their financial statements say, it's a profitable business, but they're always strapped for cash, and they're using crop input financing, and they're up against deadlines, and they're selling their commodities up against those deadlines, not necessarily the time of the market where they want to be selling, but it's where they need to be selling. It's often because of sufficiently sized credit facilities. So ensuring that you've got an operating loan sufficiently sized for the business that you have right now.
Yeah.
So having a good look at that, because it can often get away on producers, and just ensuring that it's large enough. So talking to your creditors, they've got calculations where they can help you figure out what makes sense for the size of operation that you have based on your revenue and what your expenses are, the type of business that you have, whether it's grain mixed, or you've got some other ag value business on the side, what is reasonable for the size and type of operation. So making sure that you have sufficiently sized operating loan, using that advanced program. So many producers aren't using the advanced programs that are available, and that is a really great way to reduce costs. The interest costs on the advanced program is significantly lower than any other credit facility that I have seen, whether it's a bank operating loan, or crop input financing, trade credit accounts. So those advanced programs have significantly lower interest rates. So a little bit of paperwork to do to get them set up, and they've got program rules that you need to follow. But definitely by far the cheapest place to get money. So I strongly always encourage producers to be using that money that's available to them, because that's a great way just to reduce costs and improve profitability on your farm, not by doing anything differently, just about where you're accessing credit.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, and using the right ones. It's really important that you're using the right credit facilities for the type of asset that you're buying. So lining up your whether it's a mortgage for a land purchase, or equipment loans for equipment purchases, or leases or loans for buildings, or operating loans for operating costs. So just ensure that you've got your financial picture and your credit structure aligned with what you're actually buying and what you're using the money for.
Okay.
So just as an example, when we talk about credit facilities and are you using the right ones for maximum flexibility and minimum cost, I like to do a quick calculation, and many firms are borrowing less or much more money than this on their operating for their operating requirements. $1 million at just a 1% difference is $10,000 a year in profit.
Wow.
So, and in many cases, it could be 2 or 3% is the difference. So that's a lot of money being left on the table. You're not farming any differently. You're not doing it. You're not growing your crops. You're not, changing anything with how you're raising your animals. This is just about the cost of credit and how much money that you might be leaving on the table. So having a good look at that.
And that's something we might not even think of, because you go, okay, interest rates, whatever, right? And I could be accused of that too. I don't sit there and nitpick and, really pay attention. There's a lot of other business decisions, but right there, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. And often, often producers are borrowing more than $1 million. So you can multiply that as well. So I did the quick calculation just on $1 million because it's easy figuring, but it could be 2, 3, or significantly more than that. And so a good reminder, I understand Bank of Canada raised rates today. So now's a good time to have a look at your credit portfolio and see where can we make some changes to reduce costs and improve profitability. Because in many cases, if you haven't booked fertilizer last year and you're buying right now into this market, is significantly higher. So as I said before, my dad used to say, you can't spend it everywhere. So we're spending more on crop inputs. Let's see if we can spend less on interest and close up that margin a bit.
Nice.
Yeah. Another thing to think about when we're looking at debt management is the loan details and the covenant requirements. So whether they're reporting requirements or financial covenants, making sure that you're aware of them. What do you need to meet to stay in compliance with your loan agreements? And that your accountant knows. If they've got to have your financial statements done within 120 days of your end, make sure your accountant knows that they're on a deadline there. And when it comes to financial statements, there's lots of things that get done to skew those numbers for tax purposes. Farmers are able to file on a cash basis, and that's wonderful. But making sure if you've got some financial covenants that you need to meet for your creditors, that your accountant knows. You may have a debt service requirement covenant. You may have a current ratio covenant, whatever that is. Make sure your accountant knows. So that when he's jigging the numbers in the background, that your financial statements don't show that you're offside.
Smart. I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're so often. I love having smart guests. All my guests on this show, I sit here and just soak it up. Okay, sorry, continue on.
So that's really some major points on debt management. When it comes to thinking about your longer term debt, some ways that you can mitigate interest rate risk. And like I said, interest rates, Bank of Canada rose rates today. And very likely we can very likely see that trend continue now. How long it will take, I'm not going to venture to guess because I've been wrong so many times. But we are going to see a rising interest rate environment. One way to mitigate that risk is by laddering your interest terms. So ensuring that you don't have a lot of term loans. So I'm specifically talking mostly about mortgages here because they will renew over a long period of time, longer period of time than equipment loans. Having them laddered out so that you've got some coming due in laddered years. You don't have, let's say, a couple $1 million coming due all at one time. So let's say 3 years from now, you've got 3 loans coming due. When you're locking in new rates, have a look at when other rates are coming due and you pick another year. So ideally, you can have loans coming due every year and then not having a lot coming due at once so that you never hit a high point for renewals in that period where the interest rates might be a higher rate because interest rates do fluctuate up and down. So you want to mitigate that interest rate risk by laddering those terms.
I never thought of that.
It's an interesting, it takes a little bit of looking at your credit portfolio and it's a little interesting, different way of looking at it. When folks are locking in rates on their GICs on their investing side, you can actually buy investing vehicles that will ladder those rates for you. So this is just the other side of it in designing your own credit portfolio. So you're laddering those interest terms. So you don't have a whole bunch coming due at a high point in the market.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So similar mindset to dollar cost averaging on that investing side. Yeah.
Very smart.
So another thing to consider is those security registrations. Just knowing what you have pledged for security on those loans. When you're looking at your financial health and what you have for options available for you for growth, or maybe fixing a working capital problem, knowing what your security registrations are gives you the knowledge you need to figure out what might be the solution to any situation that you're coming up with. Knowing what your loan to security positions are will give you advance notice as to what your creditors may be able to help you with. So just knowing, how much you have owing comparative to the value of that asset that's securing that debt. Okay. And when it comes to mortgage registrations, just knowing who the borrowers are, who the guarantors are, what the limits are, those type of things. And as we get into a lot more, and we've got a lot of farms going through transition, we're just at that stage where the average farmer is getting older and older, and lots of families going through transition. And in many of those transition, it includes off-farm family members family members that are not farming are now becoming owners of farm assets. Okay. So being mindful that those people may also be signing on as borrowers or guarantors on farm debt as well. Just knowing who those people are and have those people knowing what their responsibilities are. So as we're going through more of these farm transitions, we're seeing more of that. So just being mindful of those. And then, of course, I said we weren't going to talk too much about financial ratios or indicators, but that is another thing to look at, and we won't get into those today. But when you're talking about debt management, having a look at your debt per unit, so whether it's per acre or per cow, getting some benchmarking as to where you should be in the industry, so you can get help from that, certainly from consulting firms like mine, or your creditors will have that information as well. So they will have some benchmarking information for you. Many farmers wonder, okay, where do I stand with the industry? What does everyone else have for debt per unit or their leverage ratio? And just getting some information from your creditors or from accountants, consultants, folks like us that can help you with that. And like I said, that leverage ratio is another one to consider when you're thinking about your debt management and wondering what your financial health is. Also looking at your current ratio is another thing to look at when you want to think about your debt management and your debt structure. So those are some financial indicators and ratios, and that's all we're going to talk about with ratios today. Is just those are specific ones that pertain to debt management that you may want to have a look at and get some help figuring those out if you need some help with that. Where to get those numbers, how to figure out those ratios and what they mean, and how you can apply those to your individual situation to make business decisions from.
Okay, excellent. That's a lot of good information. So you worked at FCC. That's your background, right? Lending?
Yeah, my background is in lending. So yeah, I was the FCC relationship manager in Swan River from 2008 to 2014 when I started my consulting practice.
Okay. You said a lot of really neat and unique things that I haven't heard before. So thank you for sharing that part. Okay. So we have two parts, and when you work with farm families, there's the strong financial, and I know you also work on transition and meetings, communication, right? Do you want to, yeah. I think if we're done with the financial part, if you have anything more to add to that, go ahead. If not, do you want to move into some of the work that you do with farm families on communication and meetings and good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I could talk about the financial piece all day. I just love working in the financial side of things. So absolutely could. But as I tell my clients, the finance, the numbers and the financial piece is there to guide your decisions, not make them. And a really important part of managing a farm family business is about that communication with those people that you're working with. So, and that often is the tougher part. The financials is often it's all based on facts. Like you can't hide, you can't make that up. You pull that off of your statements. Here it is. This is reality. Okay, now we know what we have to work with. It's a little easier to figure out than that communication piece, because those wild cards, that's real people. You don't know where that's going. That's the tough, scare. That's really scary. As scary as the financial side can be, that communication piece can be a lot scarier.
I got to say something. So I have Farm Marketer that does the Impact Farming Show, a media company, and I'm not a numbers person born. Like I've acquired that because it's so important to business, but I'm not a numbers type. So I'm in business and then I'm growing, acquiring more staff. And then I'm like, man, I love my numbers, black and white. They're easy. They don't lie to you. It's all there. And then I'm good with dealing with people. But when you get into people, and then you have all kinds of crazy things you need to deal with. So often when we were scaling up and hiring people, I'm like, oh, just give me my numbers, please. They're so cut and dry. Anyway, sorry, take it away.
No, that's absolutely true. The communication piece is the tricky part. And so some of the things we like to talk about is the first thing is, what do we even talk about in family meetings? So we all hear about, okay, communication and communicate better. And we hear those buzzwords everywhere about communication, communicate. But how do we actually do that? What does that mean? What does that look like when we're in a farm family situation and working in a family business together? What do we talk about in these meetings? So you see, you've got scheduled meetings, having meetings with your manager or your coworkers. That's something that happens routinely. It's in your weekly schedule. It's often a little foreign for farm families. They work together. They see each other every day. They talk at lunch. They talk at supper. They might, they're talking outside when they're working. So they're not formal meetings like we may be used to as working in industry. So often the question is then, okay, well, what do we talk about when we're supposed to have these family meetings? We go to different farm seminars and they talk about having good family meetings. Like, okay, well, what do we talk about? So some of the things to talk about in those meetings is goals and values. So just having a good understanding what the goals are, it creates that environment of understanding. So you might be working with multiple generations. It could easily be 2 or 3 generations working in a farm family business. So understanding what everyone's goals are, what are their personal, family, and farm business goals. And it's super easy for farmers to define their farm business goals. It's putting up a bin or a shop, or I'm growing to 5,000 acres, or whatever it happens to be. But just having a good understanding what everyone's personal goals are and their family goals as well, because it gives you that sense of, what are we doing this for? We know how we want the business to grow. Often we've got a little bit more definition there. But what are we doing in our off time? What are we doing together as a family that has nothing to do with the business? And what are we doing for ourselves? Just our self-care that has nothing to do with our families and has nothing to do with our business. What do we want just for us? And that often can take some time. When I'm working with a farm family and talking, often it's to the male, that producer, and he's like, well, I want to put up bins, or I want to get this yard cleaned up, or I want to build a shop. I'm like, yeah, is that business or personal? Well, yeah, okay, it's business. Like, what do you want just for you? So at the end of the day, when you decide to step back from farming, what do you have left that's just you? Like, what were you doing this for? And it takes a little bit of time sometimes, but it might be, for health reasons, you need to take a walk every day. It might be that you've got an old car or an old tractor that's just been sitting way in the back of the yard or in the back of the shop for years, and you just want to get that fixed up, but you never have time to do that. So your family members also know what your goals are. And now you each hold each other accountable to getting those done. And you've got, and not sort of that whip cracking accountable, but that support saying, oh yeah, you know what? Dad wants to work on that tractor. Let's make sure that we give Dad time to do that. And we're not constantly at him saying, oh yeah, we need him to do this. We need him to fix that. He needs some of his own time, and mom needs some of her own time, and son and daughter need time. Our son and daughter-in-law need time together as a family with their kids. Just knowing what everyone's ideas are for what their goals are creates that baseline for understanding, and it helps that family work in business together, because we know working on farms can be overwhelming, and it can at times take over our lives, and there's nothing left but work. There's those busy times a year, seeding, harvest, to name a couple, calving season as well. There's not much time else for anything else, but making sure that when we can get that time, that we take it, and not get stuck in that vicious circle of just work. And yeah, we spent time together as a family working, but what did we do together as a family that had nothing to do with work? Where we weren't talking about work, we weren't out in the yard together, we went away on vacation together, or we went to the lake together, whatever it is. Just understanding what people want for themselves and for their families, not just what is a joint vision for the business.
I like that. And sorry, Denise, I was going to say it's nice. It's intentional, because with the farm and being self-employed, on two sides, I find my life is just work. It's just evolving, and it's very easy for days, weeks, months, years to go by. And then you realize all of a sudden you kind of just wake up and you go, wait a minute, we haven't done a trip. We haven't done this. And I mean, day to day, it's easy to slip away, right? But over the course of years, you go, oh, wow. We should have been a little more intentional about that, right? For health and happiness and marriage success and all that good stuff. So I really like that. It sounds, in the corporate world, I mean, you have your meetings and your day, and it's all very structured. Then you come home and you do life. But on the farm, it's just farm life. And it's one big blob, I find. So I kind of like bringing that corporate, that communication and meeting structure and goals to farms, because we're not trying to corporatize it. We're just trying to, and I don't like the word balance, but just make sure that all areas of our lives are happy, right?
Yeah. And just gaining that understanding. And yeah, I like to shy away from the word balance as well. And it's more like choices.
Yes.
Life choices, whether it's working or taking some time away, we make those choices. But yeah, just being mindful of what everyone wants out of this, so that we've got a family business, or a family unit that's strong in the business. And just getting that understanding is key. I always say, learning the why is often very, very powerful and brings a lot to light. So when I talk also about, I said, not just about the farm vision. However, having an aligned farm vision is also something that you can talk about in your family meetings, ensuring that everyone is pulling in the same direction. And this is also becomes a topic of conversation when we're going through transition. You've got one generation transitioning out or slowing down or pulling back a bit, and one ramping up and taking on more of a leading role. Often you're at different stages of life, you're at different stages of experience in the business, and the vision may not be aligned as well. One might be, okay, I'm coming in to grow, and the other one might be, no, I don't really want to grow anymore. Don't really want to take on more risk. We're done with that. On the flip side of that, when producers get to that stage of life where, they're getting into their 60s and 70s, their net worth has grown significantly. Farming is fun, and it can be fun for those folks. So they're, don't have as much debt anymore, got more money than they ever had, is feeling pretty good. They might have the growth mindset. And the generation coming in is like, you know what? We don't really want to work that hard as mom and dad did. We're at 5,000 acres. That's big enough. Let's just do more and be better with what we have. So I see both sides of it. It's not necessarily the younger generation coming in that has that vision for growth, or more growth. It's sometimes that other end going, well, I'll just buy more land. I got more money. So, and I've heard that a number of times. So just assuring that you've got that aligned vision. Where is this business going? Well, another thing to talk about is in your family meetings is risk management. This is also something that can get unaligned, just as I mentioned, as folks get into that stage of life where they're getting closer to retirement or transitioning out of the business. Their tolerance for risk management might be less than someone in, transitioning in their 30s or 40s. Often it's that time horizon. If things don't go well, I don't have time in my 60s to recapture those losses. But in your 30s and 40s, well, yeah, you potentially have quite a bit of time. So just talking about that risk management, just getting alignment there. So that's something to talk about in those family meetings. Role clarity. This can often get a little fuzzy in the middle of a transition, is when one generation is transitioning out of management roles and one transitioning in, just having alignment on who gets authority, who gets to make decisions, just ensuring that you've got some role clarity there. This is a common topic that I talk to families about when they're working with multiple people in that business is, what's the role clarity? What's the compensation for those roles? Having compensation clarity as well. Who has decision-making authority? Just getting that clarity, because without that, you can get some conflict building. Yeah. Talking about business agreements. Many farm families don't have any business agreements in place. These could be shareholder agreements, lease agreements. Many folks are getting more lease agreements in place now as opposed to the verbal lease agreements, but ensuring that if you're leasing land or you've got cattle on lease, whether they're from family members or non-family members, to ensure you've got written lease agreements in place. But those are not your only business agreements. You may have a lot of transition plans are getting a lot more intricate and complicated. They may require some business agreements between family members as well. And these are completely outside of the estate planning process. So those are things to talk about in your business, business meetings, family business meetings. Personal financial planning. This is something that often gets overlooked. Just knowing, what is your personal wealth bubble outside of the business, and make sure that you've got a balance in. And like I say, I like to have that financial balance when I'm looking at the financial health of the business, but the individuals as well. So just looking at what's your personal financial planning side. And of course, we mentioned estate planning. So there's something that can be talked about at your business meetings, and whether you're transitioning or not, estate planning is something very important. For those folks listening, if you don't have a will, please get one. Even if it doesn't answer all the questions that are in your head, having one that isn't exactly what you want is better than not having one at all. So start. Even if you don't have it all figured out, don't let that stand in your way of getting a will. It will help your family if and when they need it. We all are going to need it eventually. So it's not a fun process,
No.
but once you get into it, it's not as onerous or as expensive as you might think, and certainly no good reason not to have one.
I put that one off for a while too.
Those are things to talk about.
I think it's easy.
I was guilty.
Yeah, just the nature of wills. It's like, okay, knock on wood, I'm young, right? So you take that for granted. It's like, okay, another day, but we have it. Some business people that I deal with said, you don't have a will yet? Get it done, Tracy. That was before I even started the show here, but it's easy to put that one off.
Yeah, it is. It's an easy one to put off, and I'm guilty. I put it off for many years as well, but I've had one for a number of years now, and update it and ensure if you do have a will, when did you last look at it? Was it 25 years ago? A will is not a once and done. If it's been a number of years and a lot has changed since you've done your will, you've had, many things in life change, and they can change over a couple of years. It doesn't even have to be 20-year gap. Make sure that your will is an accurate reflection of your wishes today, not 25 years ago, because a lot changes. So there's a lot of wills out there that are outdated. So that's what I ask folks is your will an accurate reflection of your wishes if we were to need it today? And that will give you an answer as to whether you need to update your will or not. Okay. Talking about human resource management, whether those are the humans that are working for you that are not family members or the ones that are, having a chat about human resource management is a good thing to talk about in your meetings. And we touched on this a bit, is about that farm and personal time management. Many folks have different ideas with regards to how much time they want to spend in the business and out of the business, working on the farm and being away from the farm. So just having an understanding, if you got many people working in the business, what is everyone's expectations? Okay. So yeah, those are things to talk about in your meetings.
I like it. And to me, the concept, it's just Anthony and I, and we do a little bit of this, not as elaborate as we would if there was more partners, but I kind of like that because it organizes it. So instead of having mini conversations like by the water cooler, by the shop, and just randomly out of place when people might not be in that zone, like asking dad about transition when he's stressed out, don't bring it up, right? Have a family meeting where you keep that for that time and then farm and be family the rest of the time, right? It kind of keeps it in its own little bubble, and everybody comes to that conversation prepared. Because not only that, some of us are good talking about anything at any time. Other people need a bit more time for some of these conversations, right? To think it through and be ready. So that's another reason I like that intentional time to talk about the farm business. We're in that zone and it's a dedicated time for it, right?
Yeah. And that brings us to that next question is, how do we have an effective meeting? And so you talked about some of those things, and yeah, having that effective meeting is, having that meeting agenda, having that time, making sure the time works for everyone. It's not necessarily just over lunch or when folks are, on their lunch break or, checking up on emails. That's not the time to have your family meeting. Make sure that it's a time that everyone can dedicate to that time and that topic. So having that meeting agenda, whether it's a financial management meeting or any of the other topics that we've previously talked about, that's what we're talking about today. We might have a ton of things we need to talk about, but this is what we're going to work on in this meeting so that we come away from this meeting with next steps, an action plan, and how it's going to get implemented so that we feel that it was a good use of time, as opposed to coming out of the meeting going, what did we even accomplish? And was this a good use of our time? Or, some other comments that may come out of that, but come out feeling like, okay, we had an agenda. We addressed these issues. We now have an action plan, and who's going to do what and when has been defined. So we know this is moving forward, and what are the next steps going to be? So yeah, just that would be an important piece when you're thinking about how do we have an effective meeting, thinking about your agenda, but what your purpose is going to be. What's the purpose of the meeting? What's the outcome? And, how are you going to work through that meeting? What's your procedure going to be? Who's going to chair that meeting? Who's going to manage participation? Because you're going to have some folks that are very outspoken and some folks that sit back and, more of a listener. So being mindful of managing that participation and having that parking lot, because once you get together, all kinds of things are going to come up, but stay on track. Here's what we're talking about today. Yes, that's important. We're going to deal with that later. When we write it down, it goes in the parking lot. So often people just want to be heard and say, okay, yeah, we heard you. That's important. We're not brushing it under the carpet, but we've got this much time together today, being mindful of everyone's time. This is what we're talking about today. Now, do we need to schedule a meeting? That could be in your action plan. This has come up today, very important. We need to talk about. Maybe we come back next week and we're going to talk about that, or maybe it's sooner if it's urgent.
I like it.
So that's some tips on how to have an effective family meeting. But really, I think the most important piece is have your agenda, stick to it as best you can, come away from that with next steps, an action plan, who's going to do what and when, so that you can implement it.
Excellent. Okay, so maybe the biggest can of worms for last. We did the financial, we did the communication. Let's talk about difficult discussions and managing conflict, because we all know it happens. And I think, again, I walk both lines of the fence. I've done corporate and it's a little more organized there, right? It's a corporate setting. But now you do family and business collides, there can be conflict because there's so many levels to that, right? And it's family. It's just different. So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we can talk about that. And thanks for those comments. But as we work our way through this, we figure out what we want to talk about in the meeting. Now we know how to have an effective meeting, got our agenda, we're ready to go. Now we're in that meeting. Holy, we don't know who's going to say what and when. Now we're live. It just got real. We're in it now. So what happens when you get into what could be, and when we're talking about estate planning, transition planning, there are definitely going to be some delicate subjects that come up, and you might come in feeling apprehensive, and often we create all kinds of dialogue in our minds that this person is thinking this, they're going to say that, they're going to derail this. We can make up all kinds of scenarios in our minds that aren't real. And so we need to sort of put that aside and come into those meetings knowing that, it could be difficult, but how are we going to manage this when conflict comes up? And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So just some tips of how to deal with conflict when it comes up. And one of the biggest ones is just knowing ourselves, knowing what's going on inside of us. So not worrying about what's going on in the heads of others and what they're going to say and when, but what's going on with us. And when you feel that someone has said something, or you're feeling like the heat is building. And I know if I start to get annoyed or someone has hit one of my hot buttons, which is sort of flies in the face of one of my values, you feel that heat, it comes up. So just be mindful of that. If you're feeling that, then the heat is there. You need time to cool off. And yourself how long it takes to cool off, but just be mindful. If you're feeling that, then know the likelihood that you're going to be able to be productive in that meeting is significantly less than if you're going in feeling relaxed and comfortable. So if you feel you're in the meeting and all of a sudden you're feeling the heat, you need to take time to cool off. So it might be like, okay, you know what? I need a 15-minute break here. That's okay. Maybe it's longer. Maybe it's 20 or 30 minutes. If you do any psychology research, often they'll say, it takes 20 or 30 minutes once you get worked up. And I won't go into any of the psychology of it, but it will take at least 20 or 30 minutes for us to cool down. So it might mean you step out of the meeting and come back when you can, or it might mean you take a break and everyone takes a break from the meeting for 30 minutes and comes back. It might be, you know what, we need to reschedule for another day, but just being mindful of what's going on inside of you.
I was going to ask about that. Can I jump in quick?
Yeah.
Because I know when I was managing some team members, sometimes stuff happens and then you feel that, right? Because that's bad for your business or big financial consequences. And the one thing they say, step away, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer. And I've noticed, not not everything has to be dealt with in that moment. And to me, sometimes if I even took a day or a little bit longer, I finally come back to it centered with a totally clear mind and go, wow, I'm glad I didn't answer it that way. Had I even walked away for half an hour, I still would have been in that reaction mode, right? So to me, that was a big one. It's like, most things don't need to be dealt with. I just need to remove myself until I'm centered again, right? Yeah. That's what I've noticed.
It might take 2 days to get for you to, get over all the stories in your mind that you're going through when you get in that heat. And just like you said, clear your head. It might take a couple days. So some things might be more minor where you can go out, get some perspective and come back in.
Yeah.
And some things, if it's really affected you deeply, you might, or multiple people in the meeting, you might need to take a couple days and then come back.
Yeah.
Being mindful to attack the problem, that you're all working there together as a family team. You're all there for a common purpose and focusing on those common interests. So whatever they are, if you start out saying, okay, we're all here for this vision. Let's say you've got an aligned vision. So there's your common interest, but we've got this problem to work on. So ensuring that you're attacking the problem and not the person. That's going to help manage conflict in that difficult discussion. So you're not doing personal attacks, name calling, throwing pens, whatever it is, that you're attacking the problem and being very mindful of communicating that and say, we're here to work on this. We're here together as a team to work on this. And that focuses the attention and not just the attention, but the energy on the problem and not on the me and you.
Yes. I love it.
Yeah. So that's important. Just being able to express your feelings without blame. So I feel this instead of you are doing that. So confrontational. So taking the confrontation out and saying, this is how I'm feeling about this, just changes the entire tone of whatever it is that you're saying. And often I will say this, and a good friend of mine, Elaine Fraze, coins this as well. Different isn't wrong. It's just different. It's okay. If you're in that meeting, you're going to have different points of view, and that's great because that's where you come up with potentially some wonderful ideas that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. So managing conflict doesn't need to be a negative thing. Managing conflict so that you can get to a better place, some place that none of you could have gotten to on your own. But understanding that one thing is different isn't wrong. It's just different. So how can we build on that? How can we make that, use that power to get us to that better place than where we are right now? And being mindful that it's not about winning. If one person is winning, then someone is losing. So it's about the entire team winning. So you're probably going to come out with some compromises, but if you take it away, it's not about winning, giving up that need to be right and focusing on getting to that place that you need to be, about moving through this conflict, coming up with that common ground or that solution that we need to get to, whether it's a personal issue or whether it's a business issue. But it's not about winning. It's not about being right. It's about getting to that place that you need to be. And that's a tough one because when we get into conflict, well, gee, it's about winning.
Yes.
I want my point of view.
Yeah.
Yes. This is what I want to accomplish in this. I got to get my point across. But if you step back and just, you listen to understand instead of, listening to the other person to understand them instead of answering them, because you want to get your point out. Just take a step back and let your own silence do some of that heavy lifting. And remember, it's not about winning myself. It's about us all winning together is important. And not assuming, and we alluded to this, we can come up with all kinds of things in our head as to what's going on with someone else, what they're thinking or what they're doing. So don't assume, just, ask. And my grandpa used to say, you don't learn anything if you don't ask. So let's not assume, because we all know the little saying that goes with assume. Let's just, ask and be genuine. And when we're getting the answer to that question and we're listening to someone else, like I said, listen to understand, not to answer. We're not going to forget our next point that we want to make. And if we did, it probably wasn't that important anyway. Listen just to understand. And if you don't respond, that's okay. But you want to get that understanding what that other person has to say. Because like I said earlier, people want to be heard. So hear, not necessarily to respond, just to understand. And maybe your response will actually be very different than what you had thought it would be on the outset, once you understand the why.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love this stuff. What do they call it? I said this before, they call these the soft skills in business and life, right? I think that is the biggest bunch of baloney ever. The farming, the business, the numbers don't lie. I think the people, those are the hard skills. Did I get that right? They call it the soft skills, but it's actually the hard skills, in my opinion. And I'm okay dealing with people too. It's just, I wish we learned a lot more of this stuff. I think it would, like in school, I think if we learned a lot more of this interpersonal skills, like intentional classes on conflict, I didn't get that, but I digress. This is the make or break stuff for the farm and for the family relationships, right? It's not necessarily the black and white and the crops. It's all these discussions.
Yeah. And definitely when we're working through the entire process, whether it's the financial management piece or this piece, we're always looking for things that are critical to your success. And getting this right is imperative to that family business. If you can't get this right, working on those difficult discussions and managing conflict, it is going to have an impact on the business. It is going to have an impact on the profitability of the business. One fact that we have, or one quote I'd like to give is one from Dr. David Cole. And he says that businesses that are good at communication are 21% more profitable.
Ooh.
So there's how you quantify, is the softer skills stuff important? Is it important to have these discussions? Yeah, it is. Not just so you feel better about the person that you're working with or the people you're working with, or so you can continue to make sure you have Christmas dinners together, but the business is going to benefit. 21%. If we take that back and think, what would my business look like if it was 21% more profitable? That is significant. So it just speaks to just how important this is, that, you've got the equipment and you've got the land and the animals that are the business, but it's the people. The people are who's working in the business. If without the people, there is no business. So I always like to emphasize that. Don't forget about the people and be mindful to take care of the people in your family and your business. Staying in the present. There's 40 years of stuff. Yep, there is. But when you're in a difficult discussion and managing through whatever conflict, stay in the present. What is the problem today that we're working on? And not bringing the 40 years of stuff in it as well, because that just muddies the water and it's really hard to get out of that. So stay in the present. And I like to also say, let's not forget to be gracious and thankful. We're working in a family business. Like, how great is that to be working with the people that you love in your family business? It's a pretty magical thing, whether it's a farm family business or any other family business. Be gracious and thankful for those people and don't get locked down into that conflict, because at the end of the day, it's really about the people. This is what you're doing it for. It's this farm family business that's maybe been in the family for generations or will be, or the vision to be for generations to come. It really is about the people. So I like to I really can't stress that enough. Don't lose focus don't let the business vision overshadow. What is the real vision? It's this family business. We call us a family farm, many of us, for a reason. Let's not forget about the family piece.
Ooh, I was just about to ask you for words of wisdom, but that is pretty darn amazing right there. I'm going to go one quick place here. And then if you have anything you want to touch on before we wrap up, I just want to do a quick call out, because my goal here on the show is to bring people and ideas that'll impact farming operations. And this interview has been amazing. I always like to do that call out. I did it earlier, to getting people to be part of your farm business management team. So we talked about that earlier in the segment about the financial piece, and that's tricky. But I want to touch on it here as we go into the communication, family meeting, transition planning conversation that we just had. I think sometimes, because it's so loaded, the family dynamics, it's heated, there's just so much there that's a big can of worms. And often there's very strategic steps to transition planning. And I think that's where the power is on having somebody like you come in and guide that process. One, you know the steps. Two, you can also be the outside, I'm not thinking of a better word, the punching bag. You get to ask the hard questions and deflect. You're that person that can take some of that, the blame, and you can navigate the conversation. So do you want to touch on that a little bit, on the power of having a professional come into a farm family business?
Having a professional come in, whether they're a subject matter expert to help with the financial piece, or whether a communication coach just to help with your family business meeting, or whether you've got just someone that can help you facilitate. You've got your agenda, you know what you want to accomplish, but you just want someone to help facilitate. There's something to be said about having somebody third party in the room. Everyone behaves.
Yes.
The balance of power can change, because you may be not having it at, let's say, mom and dad's kitchen table. You're having this family meeting off-site, perhaps at a boardroom of this third party advisor that you've got. So you've got that balance of power. And when you're having those family meetings, it's really important that everyone feels that they have a voice and that you're being heard. And there's that a lot of respect in farm families, and rightly so. But we want to make sure that that very strong respect doesn't dampen or inhibit the flow of ideas and communication that comes out, and what someone might say at a boardroom table in town, as opposed to what they'll say at mom and dad's kitchen table, where they grew up and where they have Christmas dinners, and there's all these memories and all these future memories that can be intimidating that process. We want to make sure that that doesn't stand in the way of getting to where we want to be. So that third party facilitator, advisor, whatever they are, can help navigate that, can help you set up your meetings for the greatest success, and avoid some of those common pitfalls that seem like, well, it's a minor thing, have it at the kitchen table because it's here and it's free, but it may not be the best place to have your meeting, because there's all of that history and all of those family dynamics are right there at that loaded kitchen table that just isn't there in a boardroom or a meeting room someplace else. So yeah, and having that structure, like you said, going through the steps, just having that third party person that can maybe help you through that process and make sure that you stay on track, because it's easy to get off track. There's the busy seasons come up. Working through financial management or transition is likely going to take more than 1 or 2 meetings inside of a month. It's going to take many months. It might take many years. And you've got the business going on all side of that. You got a lot of moving parts going on. It's easy to lose sight of this stuff that nobody really wants to do anyway, to the stuff that you have to do to make the money. to manage the business. So to have that third person to act as that quarterback of the process, to keep everybody working in the same direction and sort of quarterbacking other advisors, because you're going to have many people helping you through that process. So you might have your accountant, your lawyer, your banker, your financial planner, your farm management consultant. You may have some other advisors working with you as well, investment specialists, making sure that all of those folks, whatever it is that they need to do, that piece gets done and that you keep moving forward, because it's really easy to get offside. And I always say, you know, the most important piece to these family meetings is not just the content that we're working on, but making sure that we have an action plan and implementation of that plan. And implementation is the hardest piece. You had good family meetings and you come up with this great plan. And I've worked with many families who have gone through this process a number of times, and they might have 2 or 3 plans. They're in a binder. It's very pretty. It's sitting on the shelf, but they're still stuck because they didn't have help with the implementation of the plan. And that is often the toughest piece. Who's going to do what and when? And who's accountable to make it happen, and who's checking in to make sure it happens. So if you can get someone, if someone's inside the family that can make sure it happens, great. If you need a third party to, be checking in, where are you with this? Let's have a meeting, whether it's a phone track. That's the really important piece of it, because I always say, we can sit here and talk till the cows come home, but if there's no action that comes out of it, we don't get things done, then it wasn't a great use of everyone's time.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, Denise, that has been like 3 episodes in one. We did the financial, we did communication, family meetings, and then we did conflict. That has been a lot. Thank you so much wisdom there. If I'm going to give you one last chance. If you have anything to add, you can gladly do so. If not, I'm going to work to wrap the episode up and get you to tell our audience, if they want to chat with you, how they can do so.
So I think if I have one last thing to add, I would say, just creating that time and space for that open discussion. Consider the goals and the values of the people to help get that conversation flowing. That just creates clarity, and it dispels some of those myths, those fears, misunderstandings that might be lurking in your family and business. And definitely, if you're working together for 40 years, there's stuff there. There absolutely is. But let's not let that silence hold us back. And often that silence can actually create the situation that you're intending to avoid. So I really, if I can leave folks with that, is let's just get talking. Whether it does, it might not feel comfortable, it might feel a little chunky, but let's just get that conversation flowing. And hopefully you've got some tips and best practices as how to start, and maybe who to get some help to help you if you need some help to get things started and rolling and moving forward. And a lot of it is just get moving, just get started. And folks will ask me, what is the most important piece in transition planning? Start.
Beautiful.
Just get started. So yeah, if folks want to reach out, of course, they can find me on my website, filipchuckmanagement.com is where you can find me. So Google, it'll come up. That's a great way to reach out. You can reach me by email there, and we can have just like I mentioned, a discovery call, risk-free. Let's just chat and see where we need to go from there.
Wonderful, Denise. Thank you so much. It has been fun. We covered a lot. I really appreciate you spending your time and sharing your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tracy. This has been great. It was a pleasure to be on your show. And I hope that some farm families got some value out of our comments today, and help them move forward for success in the future.
I'm sure they did. I got a lot of good stuff too. So you
Great.
in the audience, if you like this as much as I did, like it, share it, and get it out there so other farmers can hear all of the neat information that Denise shared to help you succeed in your farm business operation. So thank you guys for tuning in, and see you on next week's episode. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.